Bureau. Joining us on MS Now Justice and intelligence reporter Ken Delaney. He co-authored the story. Former senior executive in the counterterrorism division of the FBI and MS Now national security and intelligence analyst Christopher O'Leary, and Lisa Rubin, who is still with us. Ken, give us more on your reporting.
Katie, what our sources are saying is so extraordinary about this is, number one, they've never heard of a leaks investigation based on disclosures that weren't classified. And there is nothing obvious in that story, which was really about Kash Patel's work habits and his alleged drinking, nothing that seemed remotely classified. And then the other thing is that our sources are telling us that the investigation appears to be focusing, at least in part, on the journalist, on Sarah Fitzpatrick, who authored the article, as a way of ferreting out her sources. And that is contrary to decades of precedent inside the Department of Justice and the FBI, where, yes, there are leaks investigations when classified material has been disclosed, but the journalist is the last place they try to go. And in fact, there have been guidelines in previous administrations. Essentially, in the Biden administration, they made it impossible to subpoena the phone records of a journalist, for example. And in other administrations, it was supposed to be a last resort. You had to exhaust every other option. What we're told is that they're starting with Sarah Fitzpatrick, and that there is the potential that they will seize her phone records through a subpoena, that they will run her name through FBI databases and take other intrusive steps that the Atlantic magazine is saying is an attack on press freedom. Now, I should add that the FBI is denying that Sarah Fitzpatrick is under investigation or the subject of an investigation. They're not denying that there is an investigation into the disclosures, but our sources are adamant that, in fact, the Insider Threats Unit based down in Huntsville is focusing on Sarah Fitzpatrick, the journalist. Katie.
Ken, they denied that the reporting was accurate. So if they're investigating the leak, are they confirming the reporting is accurate?
That is an excellent and insightful question, actually, that other sources have raised to me all day. Why do they care about this story so much if they're saying that it's inaccurate? Now, the way they might frame it is, we're concerned that FBI officials are violating the media policy and making things up to reporters to impugn the reputation of the director. But that's the rub here, is this just Kash Patel using FBI resources to pursue leaks that essentially harmed his reputation, that have nothing to do with national security or policy? That's the question that people are raising, and it's a troubling one, Katie.
Yeah, here's the thing, and Chris, I don't need to point this out to you. Kash Patel's been on camera chugging beers. We all saw him chugging a beer in the locker room of the men's hockey team after the Olympics. So reputational damage, I don't even know what to ask on this. What do you think of the investigation?
Listen, it's baseless. It's a clear abuse of position. Listen, every FBI agent and FBI employee swears an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I did that both as a United States Marine and an FBI agent. And to a person in the FBI, my teammates to the left and the right of me saw that as, something that was their priority, a belief in duty, honor, and country. And unfortunately, the director of the FBI right now doesn't believe in that. He believes in loyalty to the MAGA movement and to POTUS, and going after the press is a flagrant attack on one of our founding principles. As an FBI agent, you cannot open up investigations, based on somebody's speech, their First Amendment protected rights. You can't go after the press, but none of those standards seem to matter anymore. And Kash Patel and other false patriots very conveniently shred the Constitution as quickly as they can when it is inconvenient for them, when such granular reporting comes out about things that we're already seeing with our own eyes. If he doesn't want critics to continue to report on him, he should start acting like a grown-up, like a professional, and like you would expect the director of the FBI to be.
Let's talk about the pattern. In April, the New York Times reported the FBI began investigating one of its reporters for violating stalking laws. We covered this here on a story that was about Kash Patel's girlfriend using FBI security resources. In January, the FBI conducted a court-authorized and unprecedented search of the home of a Washington Post reporter, Hannah Nathanson, seizing 2 computers, a recorder, a Garmin watch, a phone, and a portable hard drive. I believe she just won a high-profile, prestigious journalism award. And the FBI also launched an internal inquiry after former NBC News contributor, our friend here, Frank Figliuzzi, made comments about Patel's alleged socializing and work habits last year on Morning Joe. A judge tossed Patel's defamation lawsuit, by the way. What about the pattern? I mean, that's 3 pretty specific examples of stories that were not flattering for Kash Patel. And then suddenly these reporters find themselves in the hot seat.
Yeah, I think the issue is, this most recent example, that Ken and Carol have reported on is just another data point of why he should not be the director of the FBI. He lacks the experience, the character, the maturity, the disposition, the judgment to hold such an important position. And the country is less safe every day that he's allowed to remain in that position. And I'll make one final point, and Lisa can amplify it, I'm sure. But as an FBI agent, I could not conduct investigations into what were clearly hate groups because hate speech is not against the law. So the most vile and objectively kind of violent speech is still protected by, our Constitution or our Bill of Rights. We're not allowed to conduct investigations based solely on that. You cannot conduct investigations on the press based solely on their reporting. And we're seeing the abuse of power and the weaponization of the FBI play out in front of us, and it should alarm every American.
And let me just be clear. Hannah Nathanson had reported on the Trump administration's downsizing of the federal workforce. The FBI search was part of an investigation into a government contractor who the Justice Department said had leaked her classified information. By the way, she just won a Pulitzer. That's the award I was referring to. Lisa, let's talk about the legal avenues a little bit more, because the Atlantic says they'll fight this. Mm-hmm. How far can the FBI go with a journalist, with Sarah Fitzpatrick? Can they really just seize all of her materials and be as intrusive as they can potentially, or Ken was laying out, legally speaking? Or can the Atlantic get involved early and get a judge to stop this?
You can't do it in a preventative way, but you can do, for example, what the Washington Post did in supporting Hannah Nathanson. You can ask for an order that prevents the government from using the things that they have seized pursuant to a search warrant. You can also file what's called a Rule 41G motion. It's a motion for the return of property. But, Katie, I want to point out something to you that is, I think, reflective or at least emblematic of the pattern that you were discussing. And that's an April 2025 memo by the now acting Attorney General Todd Blanche that rescinded a Garland-era or Biden-era policy about when you could subpoena the news media and involve them in these leak investigations. Ken was noting before that it didn't used to be the case that you would have a leak investigation about something that's non-classified. But under this new Todd Blanche memo from April of last year, you certainly can do that. And they say that the government will not tolerate, and I'm reading from the memo, unauthorized disclosures that undermine President Trump's policies, victimize government agencies, and cause harm to the American people, where a government employee improperly discloses sensitive information for the purposes of personal enrichment and undermining our foreign policy, national security, and government effectiveness. They will go after that person. That is basically saying, A, the information can only be sensitive, doesn't need to rise to the level of classified, and it doesn't have to implicate our national security or defense in any way. It can just be compromising government effectiveness. Under this sort of memo, you can see how someone might justify to themselves the kind of investigation that Ken and Carol so ably reported on earlier.